Okay, so welcome everyone to the Digital Skills Gap webinar. Today I'll be joined by Paul Drew, Ian Brown and Zach Grimes, which I'll be introducing very shortly. So today's webinar is going to be quite an insightful webinar. We're going to be discussing some really nice topics about the digital skills gap and how it's been impacted by the pandemic and how businesses have been impacted in overall. So yeah, welcome everyone. Let me just make sure everyone's here. No more people joining. Okay, so I guess I'll start introducing Paul. So Paul is the Managing Director of Apprentify. He's everything that Apprentify stands for. He has 20 years in the digital marketing experience. He's been providing the next generation of talent with the skills that they need to develop. Paul has dedicated so much of his time tackling the digital skills gap, developing solutions to improve digital knowledge and resources. And he's just a generally good person to have in this conversation. I mean, Paul, what are you sort of looking to get out of the discussion today?
Hi everyone. I'm looking forward to some great discussion with Zach and Ian around digital skills and really how businesses manage to tackle the subject, especially after the last tough few years we've all faced.
Absolutely. And we've also been joined by Zach Grimes from Chartered Institute of Marketing. Zach is the education ambassador. He'll be here to provide some great insight today with his passion for learning and development, as well as his years of experience in inspiring the next generation of marketing professionals. Zach's actually an Open University graduate, so he's a great advocate for alternative ways of learning and is a massive believer in continuous professional development. So welcome, Zach.
Thanks, Deb. I love that intro. I think that's the best I've ever
had. And we've also got Ian Brown, who's from the Lloyds Banking Group. So Ian, during his career, he's helped a wide range of SMEs to accelerate and meet business goals for apprenticeships. Ian's also been an advocate for learning and development opportunities as well, working with educators to help young people develop the essential skills that they need to prepare for the workplace. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just start off with the first topic, which I'm sure everyone's excited to get into. So how do you guys think the digital transition has been impacted by COVID? And I'll go to you first, Zach. How do you think it's been impacted?
I think one of the most obvious things the pandemic has had on the digital space is it's catalysed a lot of plans that were pre-pandemic. So a lot of discussions and plans businesses had for digital in sort of the future where we are now, a lot of that was catalysed because they had no other option, and that was their route to survival. Obviously, that's had some benefits where we've seen some great levels of innovation and development, but then there's also been some real shortages, and it's really highlighted where there's been some shortfalls, particularly around skills and also technologies as well and how they work together.
Absolutely. There's been massive change, with businesses having to go online, forcing them to build on their digital skills internally. So, massive change there. Paul, what do you think? How do you think COVID's been impacted the digital sector?
I think it's impacted, across all sort of areas, really. We're seeing it with a lot of our employers and clients where, unfortunately, to some extent, retail's been hit again. Digital was becoming even more and more important, to businesses. But the high street took a unfortunate battering in those few years, and still even now, hospitality travel is still having issues, right up to today, and there has been some bounce back in the high street, but it's certainly focused more businesses to understand and harness the power of digital, which really has meant that the skills needed have had been accelerated even more, and there's so much now, emphasis on social and advertising that's all done through digital channels, and businesses need to quickly adapt. If they weren't adapting before, they need to adapt even faster and quicker and be more front of voice than ever. I heard one employer said to me that the most valuable thing to them right now is 15 seconds of engagement, because if they can capture engagement for that short amount of space, for that 15 seconds on a social channel, on an advert, on a billboard, or wherever it is, they can get some return on investment from that. Whereas years ago, it was getting people to walk through a door, or it was getting people to read an advert, do a bit of research, make a telephone call to a call center, and the world's changed. So it's meant the actual skills in the digital world have become even more sought after. And what we're teaching people now in our sort of apprenticeships and all the training needs to be up to date, needs to be changed and adapted, because the world of online is adapted 100% in this last 12 to 24 months, never mind in the last 10 years.
Absolutely, and I guess that's what we're here for, to sort of advise or sort of open the discussion about how can businesses sort of benefit from bringing in digital skills because of that gap. So also something I forgot to mention as well is, if anyone has any questions during this webinar, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be doing a bit of a question at the end as well, question and answer. So the next question will be, how can businesses prepare for the next generation of workers? So we've got millennials and Gen Z in work now. So how can businesses cater to that generation and make sure they're getting excited for work and that they're coming in and, attract it as well? I sort of wanted to get everyone included in this one. So Paul, I guess I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, we've probably faced the biggest change in working patterns since the Second World War, really, in terms of we instantly went from a high percentage being office based to instantly no office at all, and now I see it here in Apprentify and across all our employees. We're employing people that started in the middle of a pandemic that are now facing sort of dilemmas and situations where we've got to pull people back into the office, and the world of the world of employment and office based sort of working's changed. And a lot of businesses like ours are hybrid, and there's to attract people into this digital sector as well, and into that businesses are having employees that are based 30, 50, 60, 100 miles away from the office, and it's how we interact with that. How do we create a skill force that really does work well? And sometimes you never meet a colleague for months. There's so many different ways of actually harnessing this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important that we understand how businesses nowadays with the digital sector, how we can attract the talent and maintain them as well, and keep them happy at their work. Ian, I'll change this question to you. So how do you think businesses can prepare for the next generation of work?
Sure. So I spend probably quite a lot of time with young people in schools and in colleges, and then listening to what it is that they have to say. And I think, as the guy said earlier on, the world of digital has changed so rapidly in the last 2 years that almost the kind of recruitment side of where you're going to find your talent from is still trying to kind of catch up with the pace of change within digital. So a couple of thoughts from me would be, one is, digital is a kaleidoscope of many different skills and many different talents. And so one thing that employers can think about is helping young people to understand what that kaleidoscope actually looks like. So what you don't want to do is to find yourself just typecast into having young people think it's just all about coding computers, because that will get you some people, but a whole range of people who may be fascinated by the graphic design, the artistry side of social media and advertising, or the people who are just brilliant mathematicians who you need in search engine optimization and the data analytics to control the spend that you're putting on advertising, may miss you because they just look at the word digital and think, I just don't fancy coding computers. So I think there's one thing is about a need for the industry to kind of break that apart for young people, to help them understand that it doesn't matter that you didn't study GCSE computing. That isn't necessarily what we're looking for. So you need to kind of help them break the stereotype. The second thought from me is around purpose. So everything we know about Gen Z and then what will come behind them is that retaining Gen Z is about giving people jobs with a sense of purpose. And that places a responsibility on us as leaders of businesses to help people who come to work for us understand how to connect what they do with an end purpose for a client, and not take that story for granted just because it's in our heads, but really kind of draw the lines together. Zach's point earlier on about the way the businesses have accelerated, local businesses have mushroomed into national brands, whereas they were just operating in one tiny little part of the country through digital, is a great case in point, because you guys enabled that to happen. That little family business that existed for 100 years that has now got another 100 years worth of life in there is because of the clever stuff that you guys can do. And that's what Gen Z want to hear. What is the point of what I do? And we just have to say it over and over.
Absolutely. It's so important to make that clear, especially for this next generation, who really want clarity on everything and honesty and transparency. Zach, from your perspective, is there any way that businesses can prepare for the next generation?
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the big things is tying in with sustainability. We're seeing that everywhere, and I think it's a topic that is becoming more of a priority for younger people when they're making those career choices. They're not a generation that tend to want to go and earn loads of money, and they obviously want to earn money, but then that's not their primary motive. As Paul and Ian have touched upon there, it's estimated by 2050 the workforce is going to be 75% made up of millennials and Gen Z, and I think that's a thought that businesses need to start thinking about now for that sustainability of their lifespan, and to make sure that they've got that future proof in what they do. The other thing as well, I think that is important, is that transparency. So using their digital presence to be transparent, not necessarily selling and promoting products and services, but actually building their brand and the relationships with that audience. I think that's becoming a real driver for young people in the choices they make.
Absolutely, and you're seeing it more and more in the sort of digital industries where young workers or apprentices are coming in and they're making their own brand within the business, and they'll end up being the face of the brand because of the role that they're in and the natural sort of digital skills that they already have, it's a social media generation. So yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I guess we move on to the next question, which is, where does the new talent actually come from? I'll take this one again to you, Paul.
Yeah, so I suppose the traditional routes of going down a graduate sort of recruitment program, is slightly disappearing, because we're seeing it now in our apprenticeship world, where employers, they need talent that's from diverse areas, age groups, sort of different sort of behaviors and characteristics, that isn't just a 24-year-old graduate coming out of university. It's actually, digital can be done by anybody, essentially. It's identifying that set of characteristics and behaviors that will actually do well in digital and be creative. It doesn't have to just be creative. It could be analytical. It could be an eye for attention to detail or design. So there's lots of different areas in digital. When I first got into it, you were digital marketing, you covered everything. Now everything's siloed. We're putting people putting apprentices in that are just doing TikTok videos and managing TikTok channels as a career. That was never a career 2 years ago. It was never even thought of 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, businesses are seeing the power of all these technologies and all this, as I said earlier, this engagement, and there's now careers in this. And so, we're constantly looking for people that have that ability and drive, and sometimes that comes from their own sort of social life that they have. People of of a certain age, not like myself, are constantly on social media 24/7 doing, and that's their life. Their communication is done through 230 characters. And that is important to businesses, and people can use that. People can use that for their jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's where the investment from the apprentice or the young worker does come from. The fact that they are doing the social media and the networking outside of work. So it just ends up being they're working as their hobby, I guess. So they're more sort of invested in it. They're probably more excited to do it as well. So it's a good investment for a business as well. So I'll take it down to you, Ian. Where does new talent come from? Is there any sort of advice for SMEs that you could give?
I think is think more expansively. I think it's very tempting for us to imagine that actually all of your talent is going to come from people who leave school. So let's think, what we know is that, some study by McKinsey had already told us that 90% of people in work today will need to upskill to be able to do the jobs that they do today by the end of this decade. So, this reskilling nature is not kind of like a minority sport. That's the majority of us will have to change, including those who are being hired today into digital roles will continue to evolve. So yes, you have your young people, and I talked earlier on about opportunity for engagement with schools and colleges to break that apart. But I think also not to lose sight of the need to continue to skill and reskill your existing workforce and make sure that you maximize the talent that lies in understanding your organization's DNA, which will help you to kind of inject some stability into the workforce as well. So you don't just have this kind of like cyclical rapid turnover if that doesn't suit you. And I think the final bit, which we look out from Lloyd's interest in this, which is where we support SMEs with levy transfer. So supporting SMEs with the costs of apprenticeship training, are the number of adults who've reflected through the pandemic and then thought in midlife, look, I've got at least another half of my lifetime in work ahead of me, and I'm fed up with what I was doing and it's time for a change. So they may still have 30 years left in the workforce ahead of them, which is an immense amount of time. They may not necessarily have the digital skills that an employer needs right now, but what they probably do have are really immense respect for customers and clients from the previous industry that they've come from. They may understand fulfillment, because it's not enough just to sell a product, but it's important that it actually fulfills over its life. They may understand client care to a really fine degree, and they may also really understand the value of customer loyalty, which I'm sure Zach will tell us about how to move the metrics in terms of how hard it is to acquire a new customer versus how hard what you have to do to retain one. So I think it's looking a little bit more expansively at, yes, these people may not understand quite how to make a TikTok video, but actually there are other things I can teach some of that, and I can bring other things with them as well. And when we're in a war in talent, really can't afford to kind of just look down one path when there are other pools of really, really good people who want to make that shift who are available to us.
Absolutely. And Zach, do you have anything to add on to that one then?
I do, yeah. The other thing I'd probably add to echo what Paul and Ian have both said is, and Ian touched upon it slightly there, is looking at, businesses taking a look at their equality and diversity with their brand appeal, and not subconsciously looking at one particular audience who their brand appeals to, but actually, taking an inward look to see how they can become, more broadly speaking, appealing to a greater range of audiences, whether that be genders, race, age. There's work to be done there for a lot of organisations in how they position their brand, so that it becomes more appealing in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that smoothly transitions onto our next question, which is, how do you attract the talent that you need? Paul?
Right, so attracting the talent that you need is, I think Ian mentioned it earlier, that businesses really need to to appeal to lots of different audiences now. We've gone from a world of everybody working in an office and doing very silo jobs. If you look today, 10 years ago, there was probably 100 different job titles in an office environment. Now there's thousands, because everything's become very specialized and targeted. So, to attract, attract your sort of, your talent, you've really got to appeal to, to a wider audience, and a lot. We put a lot of emphasis now, and today, on well-being and physical sort of well-being, and and everything around sort of around the individual. We focus now so much on the individual, and we have to make sure that that people can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to the change in priorities of the generation as well. It's about the employer understanding their priorities and needs and being able to cater to that. So it's less about, high salaries being money driven, and more about the well-being and taking care of that side of things, and just maintaining excitement and interest in their role as well. So that's really important. Ian, from your perspective, how do you attract the talent that you need?
So I think the journey that we're on at the moment is, because digital is such the new baby, right, is that we've invented lots of terms which we feel quite proud of in a digital world, but then we forget that outside the digital world, most people don't really understand them. And that's a major barrier, I think, because out there is talent who could really engage in this space, but actually they can't read through job titles that are largely things that we've just invented, right? They've only existed for the last 2 to 3 years. So I think some of this is to get the diversity, as Zach had talked about earlier, is really breaking things down beyond a job title. So what is it that you're looking for? Not just in terms of the technical skills, which by and large you can train people up in, but also what are the human behavioral characteristics that you want? Somebody's ability to be a good speaker or a good listener or a good team worker, to be great at problem solving, to be able to pick themselves up when things go wrong. Because you'll find the more that you can talk about human behavioral characteristics within your job adverts, this is what I'm looking for, that both widens your pool, because people could have acquired that experience in lots of different ways, and it just brings you more interesting diversity than necessarily just hiring narrowly to people who understand what that job title is. So it's kind of remembering really about the things that you can resolve through training. So through Levy Transfer and the work that we do, for example, with you guys in Apprentify, supporting through Levy Transfer, there are devices for training people in digital marketing. It is possible to train people in digital marketing. It's much more difficult to support somebody who has really, really poor ability to listen, or finds it very, very difficult to problem solve on their own or pick themselves up when things go wrong. Those are devilishly difficult to resolve by training. So it's just kind of really thinking through, when you're kind of trying to profile people in there, what are the things that I can really just resolve through training products as I'm recruiting, but what are the things that actually I really need as the base skills coming in, and just thinking it through in different levels, because it will open more doors, not just for you as a business, but also for diverse candidates as well.
Absolutely. And it's all about employers being able to relearn the way that they recruit. And again, like you said, just honing in on the personal qualities rather than just the skills, because skills can be taught within the role as well. And it also means that they're more invested probably in their work if they're sort of learning on the job. Perfect. So Zach, from your perspective, how do you think you can attract the talent that you need?
First of all, I think the obvious one is getting marketing teams and HR teams to work closer together. And one of the things I'd like to see personally in organisations is the development of personal brands. I don't just mean at the top level of an organisation, but within an organisation as well, in showcasing what it's like to work for that business. It's great hearing from the top level management what the business is like to work for, but actually if you dig below the surface and can hear from employees at various levels and in various roles across an organisation, I think that's going to be really powerful and really going to develop that employee advocacy. There's a great example if you are a TikTok user, if you look at M&S Romford, and they've got a real good way of embracing that employee advocacy, where they get the employees across that store to showcase what it's like to work there. They get on trend with topics that are trending at a period of time, but actually it's had a huge impact on that store's footfall, where it's actually become a point of interest now for people to visit. So I think there's great opportunities there for business to really embrace that and become more attractive to the next employee that they want to bring in.
Absolutely, and I'll have to look at that M&S TikTok later on because it sounds quite interesting. I guess the next question then goes on to, how do SMEs or businesses in general identify the skills gaps within their own businesses? Ian, I'll turn to you first.
Lovely. Thank you. So it's going to be different for different businesses, but sometimes when we're looking at when we're having conversations with businesses around apprenticeships and levy transfer, one of the kind of simplest unlocking questions is just asking yourself, in 5 years' time, do you see in your business, in the best will in the world, do you see exactly the same people doing exactly the same thing in exactly the same way? And of course, the answer to that is very likely to be no. And you can pick it apart from there. So do you see you having exactly the same people? No, because some of your people will go on to leave. So where is your promotion program? Where is your development program? Where is your replacement program? Do you see them having exactly the same skills that you've got at the moment? Look at your competitors, look at what's out there, look at where the customer demand is going, and then start to think, actually, where, how do I build that ladder? Because it's not quite the oil tanker, but you don't just turn skills around on a sixpence, right? Some of these things take a little while to learn in there. And also look at the skills.
Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I thought we lost you. I was wondering whether it was my line or your line or whatever in there. So my final plug in there, if you're in Greater Manchester, if I can, is we do talk about apprenticeships, and it's very easy to think about apprenticeships as being about level 2 or level 3 and all about entry level. But of course, apprenticeships go all the way up into level 7, and it's tough being a leader of a business because sometimes you just feel like you're on your own and you're responsible for your own development. And it's not like you can go to your competitors and say, I'm really struggling with this. Could somebody help me? So get some training for yourself, and remember that the support that's there from levy transfer from the bigger businesses can be for you as the leader. It's not just about the new entries into your organization. We have a number of people at the moment who we're sponsoring as Lloyds who are leaders of their businesses, and we do that because investing in their ability to grow is what will create the employment for a new generation as well. So don't forget yourselves in the big skill debate.
That's why I'll turn to Paul. So Paul, how do Apprentify, or how do you think SMEs can identify the skills gap within their business?
So we help hundreds and hundreds of employers all the time look at their sort of what their requirements are. We have to get employers coming to us. We know we need people. We just don't know. We just don't know the extent or the numbers. So we're often going into organisations and looking at where their sort of return on investment is highest, and where they're focusing their current resources within the teams. As I've mentioned a couple of times earlier, we've gone from just having digital marketers or developers or data analysts. You know, we've gone on to having sort of specialist sort of people looking at sort of silos within each area. But it's really looking at what does that bring in for a business. You know, we've had employers that have focused people on areas where they thought they were getting the return on investment, and actually it's something over here. So it is a bit of a minefield, really, in understanding you know, the intricacies of the digital world now. But that's sort of part of the beauty of digital marketer at level 3 as an apprenticeship, for example. It's actually it teaches all the skills in digital marketing, and they can specialize, once they've gone through and they realize that actually sometimes, this person's more analytical than creative, or more creative than analytical, so they can fit into that sort of area rather than the other. So it is very important. It's very important right now that businesses start to understand what gets the, what gets the best return and the best sort of impact for their business, because there's so much you could focus on in the digital world that actually gets you little impact, and yet, on this side you could be focusing over here, with a little bit of resource and actually get more impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess what it comes down to in terms of the first step of identifying the skills gap is identifying what solutions you want. So looking into each department and where your skills are, and then also just sort of identifying sort of where you're missing out on in order to develop your business in general. So I guess we'll go on to the next question, and it's primarily for you, Paul, as the apprenticeship expert. So we'll go down to, I guess, when we are recruiting talent, when businesses are recruiting talent, what is the difference between hiring an apprentice versus a graduate?
So, I mean, I suppose the world's changing in the digital sort of sector. If I take an example of, we work with a large digital marketing agency. The employees sort of 2,000 staff members all across the UK, and we went to one of their head office actually, and we sat there with the director, and he stood up and said, look at there, all you can see are graduates, and what he wanted was a diverse workforce, and that was so essentially they could get more creativity into their sort of work and for their clients. And when we say more creativity, is there's so much going on in this world right now that creativity and that engagement and that capturing that engagement, so much I mentioned earlier, is so important right now, that it's about creating a sort of a workforce that really does have skill sets and knowledge and ideas that come from different lenses. And when I say different lenses, is that what I see is different to what other people see. It's just how I've been brought up and the exposure I've had in my world. And so the ideas and what I like and I come out with, are different to other people and the way they are. And with apprenticeships, what you get that not only age but area, location, education, you get that diverse sort of thought process, and also with that, you sometimes you get more tenacious and you get more driven culture. I'm not saying that the graduates aren't tenacious and driven. They are, because they've shown that level. They've gone to university. They've shown that level of self-development. But so as an apprentice, and an apprentice is on a journey for 13 months. And what we found is that with apprentices, they stick longer in their career, whereas some people coming out of university going into a job, you know, they've got experience after a year and off they go. With an apprentice, actually, they bought into your culture. They come with, as I'm going to say, as a blank sheet, you know, a blank sheet to develop. But that's really, you know, they will have skill sets and knowledge. I understand that, but actually, they come into an organisation and they're sponge. They learn, they develop, and they grow, and they not only grow in their own skill sets and knowledge about digital marketing and digital, you know, and marketing itself, they're actually growing as people and growing as understanding of corporate culture and creative culture, whatever the sectors and job they're in. They're actually growing as a person, and they actually become more ingrained, embedded in the organization as well. So actually, when they get to that, maybe that sort of, you know, that 3-year, 7-year itch that some people have in life, where they just want to change because that's it. Actually, we don't see that with apprentices. We actually see them staying on and actually going on to, you know, to be future leaders of many businesses, because they feel valued, they feel developed, they feel like the organisation has also put something back into them. You know, whereas graduates come with the skills and the knowledge, they still need to develop behaviours and some of the skills, but that's part of the difference and part of the real benefit of having apprentices is that's happening. And actually, as we're coming out of COVID, it's a candidate driven industry that we're in now, in a market. So organizations and actual individuals are commanding higher salaries, which is great for, you know, for the individuals. But whereas a role 3 years ago, you know, was commanding, you know, £25,000 salary for 1 year's experience, it's now much higher. And organizations, you know, they need talent and they need volume of it, and that's where apprentices also come into there, because actually you can develop them, and, you know, and they stay longer, and actually, you know, they become much more cost effective for organizations. So it's, you know, so it's a you know, there's a lot of differences between, you know, and the apprentice and I'm going to say other employees. Really, it's not just graduates, because you know, we're trying to interject people into organizations which would never have got the chance. You know, we, as another digital agency, we worked down in the West Midlands, and they actually struggled with getting people from their local postcode area. And because it was a diverse postcode area, and the reason when they did the analysis, what they realized is that people in the local area just thought that the world of digital, you had to be a really skilled person that had lots of knowledge and understanding of it, and they didn't think it was a career they could ever get in, the foot on the ladder. And actually, when they actually applied to the apprenticeship route rather than apply to a graduate route, because they thought it was easier to get the foot on the ladder, which is a real shame, because actually, you know, creativity and digital and design, anybody can do it. You just need to understand and learn. You know, if you've got a real natural flair for data, or for art, or for, you know, being, you know, for writing, you know, there is a job, there is a area that you would be absolutely amazing at.
Yeah, absolutely. And something you mentioned as well is how much investment needs to go into it, and both from employer and apprentice perspective, but also with that comes a lot more investment from the apprentice. So they'll be loyal to the company and more likely succeed in the company and, you know, develop in there. So yeah, really interesting insight on that. Let's move on to the final question, and then we'll take on some questions from the audience. So pre and post pandemic, let's take a look at what business lessons we've learned. I'll take this one to you, Zach.
Thanks, Deb. I think one of the biggest business lessons, that's probably the most obvious one for everyone, is just that level of uncertainty. So it's a key word we've all used in some way, shape or form over the last few years, but it continues to grow, and that's the case for marketeers. The level of uncertainty, the rise in demand and changes of consumer behaviours are constant. But I think businesses are now becoming much more open and more agile to that. And that's the only way they're sort of seeing survival being sort of future-proofed going forward. So I think that level of openness to that, actually things could change again, and that continuous need to be learning on the job, which sort of adds more value to why apprenticeships and that continuous professional development is even more so necessary. With that level of uncertainty, and as I mentioned earlier, the level of innovation and growth that's happening, the pace for that supply and demand is just huge. Demand is growing and growing, but there's a shortage of skills, as Paul mentioned just before.
Absolutely. And Paul, do you have anything to add on to that, on how businesses have been impacted pre-COVID versus post-COVID?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the pre-COVID, we were sort of all on a trajectory we all knew, didn't we? We all knew where we were going, fingers crossed anyway. And we were thrown into this bit of a black hole at the time. I can remember where those first few weeks, and sat down and going, well, this is new. We need to plan. We need to plan something, really, really good, because our business is going to go out of business. And a lot of our employees were facing the same. And when we've, and actually, it's been amazing to see how industry, how the government, how competitors all came together and worked together and got out of some of these quagmires. But we've all been agile, and that's reflected in the way that the digital skills and the talent is proven now. You would probably say that most businesses are now probably hybrid workforce, whereas prior to that, I would say most of them were office based, or and there was very few that were fully home based. And it's been amazing to see how businesses have adapted, and how they've adapted technology to help them to get through this and provide a workable environment for people that probably 2 years ago a lot of people would have crumbled at the fact that they've got to work from home and or do creative sessions all online, or plan campaigns and do stuff without ever meeting a colleague, to have which was done in a room with a load of post-it notes prior, and it's all changed, massively changed.
Yeah, so it's all about businesses being able to sort of adapt to this new digital way of working then, with as well as adapting to the next generation of working, so that comes hand in hand. Ian, lastly, do you have anything to add onto how businesses have been impacted pre-COVID versus post-COVID?
So my perspective is, the big thing that we learned from COVID was how we all coped when there was no rule book for anybody to follow, because we've never seen this before. And the greatest asset that we ever saw in all of our teams was what happened when we all were transparent and said, we don't know how to do this. Everybody needs to pitch in their ideas, and everybody needs to look for where are the opportunities. And it's really shifted organizations from thinking from a kind of command and control leadership style, where you as the boss will tell somebody what to do and then they will do things within a box, to having something that's more equitable, where you're looking at every person in your organization as a stakeholder who can create new value for you and really recognizing their ability to create value beyond your expectations, because they can specialize in an area that you can't master as a leader. And that's certainly what we found in Lloyd's as a business, but I see it over and over again. And Paul made some great points about what do you get with apprentices, because I appreciate that lots of businesses will be going, I've got to invest in an apprentice. That means I've got to have somebody who's being trained. Do remember that apprentice, when they're out doing their training for that day, is rubbing shoulders with all of your competitors and people you've never known. They come back with a mine of information that you can never get hold of. It'll take you a lifetime to manage to find. They're playing with ideas, they're experimenting with ideas, they're in the I wonder if. They are your ultimate think tank. So yes, they are having to be taught certain things, and yes, there are some technical skills that they don't have when they come to you, but they are your innovation force for your organization. And I think it's quite often underestimated in apprenticeships, this aspect of what they will bring to your businesses that otherwise you would pay a small fortune to go and buy in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in this case, we can see the pandemic as a sort of positive thing for businesses and employers coming in with the digital skills and being more excited about it as well. It's really, really exciting time for both businesses developing their digital skills and people wanting to sort of get into digital roles because there's a lot out there at the moment. Okay, so I guess we'll go on to questions. If anyone has, we've got a couple already on the chat, but if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to add any on there and we'll discuss it within us. So the first question is to everyone. How can SMEs develop apprentices when they often have very little experience of digital arena themselves? Is this an issue for apprenticeship providers? Paul, I'll move this on to you first.
It's not necessarily an issue or a problem. We have employers and line managers have little or no experience in digital. How would the apprentice model works in most businesses is that you have the training, but you also have a coach, a digital coach that is allocated to the employer and the apprentice. So that coach's role is to handhold both the apprentice and the employer, the line manager, to sort of guide on how to get the best out of the apprentice, but also out of the marketing. In some cases, our coaches end up being sort of mini consultants working on social media campaigns and advertising campaigns and looking at Google ads and emails and various different sort of assets to help the apprentice and the employer to get the most of their business. So it's not a huge issue. If an employer hasn't got any experience or knowledge, it helps the apprentice if they do, because the apprentice needs that sounding board and that guidance. But that can be sort of to be done through the coaching network, and really the apprentice needs just that guidance to let them grow and develop, and that can be done by any leader or manager. The idea of the coach and the coaching network is there to help and aid and sort of make the growth higher and bigger and larger and better.
Absolutely. And I guess, Ian, from an employer perspective who's also taken on apprenticeships in the past, what advice can you give to SMEs to be able to prepare for a digital apprentice coming into their workplace when they have little experience within that role?
When the organization has little experience?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's about thinking about changing your leadership style from being a directive leadership style to getting used to learning how to ask good questions. So if you really want the value from your apprentice, get used to asking them really good questions. How can we? How can I? How come our competitors are able to? And let them go off and figure it out for you. So I think it's just that shift in leadership style, because sometimes when we're especially if we're the founder of the business, we kind of feel this expectation on us to know everything. We did every job when it was a tiny business, and now it's big and we did a little bit of everybody's. you're never going to have that in this world. So it's kind of time to free yourself of that obligation, change a little bit of your own personal style and get used to actually asking really good questions. And then that's what you pay them for. Let them go off and find the answers for you.
Absolutely. It's about giving that trust back to the apprentice, because they are capable a lot more than what we think as a sort of society. We'll go on to the next question then. I would like to know more about upskilling existing staff via an apprenticeship versus taking on a younger apprentice with little or no experience. Paul, as the apprenticeship expert.
Okay. Yeah, so we, apprentices aren't just for new staff members. We can put existing staff on for employers. It's slightly different in the fact that we would do a skills scan, which we do on both new and existing staff members, but it's slightly different for an existing staff member. So we try to understand, what skills and knowledge they've got already, because they have to be right for the apprentice. And we also try to understand, have they got the time to allocate for an apprenticeship? Because an apprenticeship is there has to be time for both the training, the coaching, and the self-development and the off-the-job allocated to the individual. So we spend a lot of time with employers really trying to understand, is this right for their staff member? Have they got the time to allocate it to? Because we found with a lot of employers that sometimes it's very difficult to go from a 9-to-5 job where you've got a full diary, email list, various different projects on the go, and then allocating time to an apprenticeship. So both the employer and the apprentice have to be totally dedicated to this to make it 100% work. And it can work, and it does work in most cases, but we often make we spend more time on that than we do on the apprentice skill scan, because that's where we have to really make sure that the employer sees that value with the apprentice and the existing staff member, going, we can allocate time and get things off their diary and out their email inbox to make this work.
Yeah. Sorry. I guess I'm going to extend this one onto you, Zach, as well, because I know you've previously said how apprenticeships have no age limit. So how do you think it would? So what do you have to add onto upskilling existing staff versus taking on a new younger apprentice?
I think within a lot of organisations, it's addressing the stigma. Still, there is still a stigma that apprenticeships are for young people. When we know that there's some great examples out there. So there's great need for case studies of that, where older people have transitioned and used an apprenticeship to enhance their career. I think all the quality assurance, what Paul touched upon there, really sort of showcases that level of importance to making sure that person can commit to it. But I think it can really help an organisation to address any skills gaps too. So if they're looking inwards, can they actually retrain people? We've seen the challenges around digital skills, particularly from the pandemic, which we've covered today. And, I think maybe that's a question organisations need to be asking themselves, and working with colleagues to overcome any fears as well. There are a lot of people who have digital skills who claim that they don't. And, it's actually unearthing that, maybe doing a skills audit internally, or working with, a training provider like Apprentify, who can come in and support that and build a framework to see where apprenticeships can really add value. So I think for me, it's really addressing that stigma and instilling confidence in people to take that challenge on, that actually, whether you're 35, 55, or or a young 16, 17-year-old leaving school, you've got an opportunity there to develop your skills and be of value to yourself and to the workplace in this modern way of working that we're in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll move on to the final question, and that is, how do employers find the balance between current business needs and training inexperienced apprentices? So Ian, would you like to lead this one?
Well, obviously for my business, we've got 65,000 employees, so I appreciate I'm probably at a different scale to everybody else on this call here. But it is important all the same. So as Paul said, if you're going to put people onto apprenticeships, you need to give them time to learn. Otherwise, you're wasting everybody's time in there. So that will create some tension in terms of finding the right balance in there. You also have to recognize the apprenticeship is systematic structured learning over a period of time. So it could be 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, depending on what you're going to be looking for. So this is where strategic workforce planning, really thinking ahead, helps in there as well. And you also need to think about why you're doing this. So what are they going to come out? What's the world they're going to come out into at the end? Because if you're giving people an injection of activity to fuel that growth mindset, it's not very likely that they're going to finish at the end of that and then go, well, that's me done now. They're going to want to grow again. So if you want to hang on to your investment, you need to kind of almost, not that I play pool very well, but sequence the balls up, really think about, if I go there, where am I going to go there? Where's that shot? Where's that shot? So you just kind of got, and that's where we talked about that 5-year lens, just think it through where you're going to go, but it's perfectly doable. 80% of our apprentices in Lloyds are reskilling. Why? Because the nature of the changing digital landscape means we have to do it. But these people carry an immense amount of knowledge of our organization, our customers, our processes, and our organizational culture and DNA that we wouldn't want to lose. Even if it was unethical to let everybody go and start all over again, you just lose so much. So don't lose sight of upskilling and don't be scared of it, I would say, in those things. And structures like levy transfer, which will support the funding of that, apply equally to upskill as they do to new hires.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, Paul, I'd like for you to chime in on this one. So how can you advise employers to balance between current business needs and training inexperienced apprentices?
So yeah, so it's really understanding your what is what's important to the business and really looking at time management, because when we sat down with employers who have struggled with with this subject, it's some of the coaches have done a time and sort of motion study in terms of with the employer of going, actually you're spending time here, but if you spent more time with the apprentice on this side or focusing on here, actually the apprentice could take a chunk of your work away from you. So it's very key that employers and line managers look at their sort of their what they've got on, to understand that they will get more out of developing the resource and when I say resource, developing the apprentice and then passing on their workload to the apprentice, or actually getting the apprentice to actually drive and develop more activity, more inquiries, more reach, more clicks, or whatever the objective is, than actually focusing solely on certain things. So it's it's a skill set, and being a manager and leader, and that's part of your role. When you get to that level, you think it's all great, fantastic. You don't have you spend more time looking at your diary and managing other people's diaries than you do with yourselves, because it's actually important to get everybody to look at things. So it's really looking at those business needs, and looking at where and it's not just apprentices, it's all staff, as it's looking at where you can actually get best value and get best return for as little effort and resource at one end or focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And it all comes down again to the investment side of things. As employer, it's important that you invest into this training and support in order for your business to develop and succeed, I guess. So it goes hand in hand with that. Okay, I think that's the last of the questions. So I guess we'll end the webinar here. I mean, it's been really insightful conversation. I hope a lot of people have gained a lot of insight from it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an email address into the chat. If anyone has any questions or would like to find out more about our apprenticeships that we offer, feel free to email me directly and we can get the conversation going. Perfect.